My name is Maya Okonkwo. I'm 31 years old, and for the first 28 years of my life, my father called me the ugly one at the dinner table like it was my name. Not once. Not as a slip of the tongue he regretted in the shower later. Every Sunday. Every Thanksgiving. Every birthday dinner at the long oak table in the house I grew up in on Sycamore Drive in Columbus, Ohio, he would gesture toward me, sometimes with his fork still in his hand, a piece of my mother's joll of rice balanced on the tines, and say it like it was a fact as settled as the weather. The ugly one. Sometimes he'd add context. Maya, you know the ugly one, pass me the salt, and everyone would laugh, or look away, or keep chewing, and I would reach for the salt shaker, and pass it down. But I want to tell you about one specific Sunday, March 4th, 2018. I was 23 years old. I had just driven 4 hours from Pittsburgh, where I was in my second year of graduate school studying architecture, because my mother had called and said my father's birthday dinner would mean a lot to him if I came. So I ironed a dress, a blue one, wrap style, from a boutique on Penn Avenue that I'd saved up for, and I drove through sleet and bad visibility on the interstate, and I arrived at that house with a bottle of Hennessy XO that cost me $68 because I knew it was his favorite. I walked through the front door. My father was sitting in the living room with my brother Emeka, and my sister Adaze and two family friends I hadn't seen in years. He looked up when I came in. He looked me over, the blue dress, the boots, the box in my hand, and he turned to one of the family friends and said, "This is Maya, my ugly daughter, but she's the smart one, so." And he laughed, and everyone in the living room managed some version of a smile. And I stood there in the doorway with $68 of Hennessy in my hands, and I thought, this is the last time. It wasn't. But eventually, it became the last time. And what happened in between is what I need to tell you. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. These stories take a long time to write, and every like and subscription genuinely helps more people find them. And wherever you're watching from right now, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I'm always moved by how many people from so many different places have sat with a version of this same story inside their own chests. Tell me where you are. I want to know. Let me take you back to Columbus, Ohio. Winter, 1997. I am 3 years old and I do not yet have language for what is happening, but I have the body memory of it. The way a room can shift temperature when an adult decides you are less than. My brother Emeka is 5. My sister Adadaze is 7. We are 3 children of Chukwuemeka Okonkwo, who everyone calls Chuk, and his wife, my mother Ngozi. My father came to the United States from Enugu State in Nigeria in 1985, with 2 suitcases and a mathematics degree, and a stubbornness that I would come to understand as both his greatest strength and the thing that nearly destroyed our family. He built a real estate management company from a 2-room office on Morse Road. By the time I was in elementary school, Okonkwo Property Group managed 43 residential units across Columbus and a strip mall in Westerville. He was not a poor man. He was not an uneducated man. He was not, by the standards of the world, an unkind man. He gave generously to his church. He hired people who needed chances. He coached youth soccer for 6 years. But inside our house on Sycamore Drive, he operated by a taxonomy that had been handed to him by his own father, and his father's father, and somewhere in that taxonomy, I had been assigned a rank, and the rank was least. I want to be precise about this, because I am not interested in melodrama. I am interested in truth. My father did not hit me. He did not deprive me of food or shelter or education. He paid for my private school tuition, my school supplies, my braces. By every material metric, I was provided for. But there is a kind of cruelty that lives entirely in the register of language and attention, and my father was a master of it. He administered it consistently, and without apparent guilt, the way some people take vitamins. Aisha's was the beautiful one. This was stated plainly from the time she was small. She had my father's features softened by my mother's symmetry, high cheekbones, deep-set eyes, skin, so even it looked like it had been planned. My father would hold her face in his hands at the dinner table and say, this one, this one will marry a senator. He paid for her to take modeling classes at a studio on High Street when she was 12. He drove her to those classes himself, in the tan Lexus, while my mother drove Emeka and me to our activities in the minivan. When Addis was selected for a regional teen beauty pageant in 1999, my father took 2 days off work and drove the whole family to Dayton. We sat in folding chairs in an auditorium that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and hairspray, and we watched Addis walk across a stage in a dress that cost $420. She didn't win, she placed third. My father stood and applauded like she had. Emeka was the heir. In Igbo families, or at least in my father's version of an Igbo family, the first son carries a particular weight of expectation and also a particular quality of love. My father coached Emeka's soccer team. He took Emeka to work with him on Saturdays to walk properties and talk numbers. He had Emeka's name engraved on a watch, a Seiko, stainless steel, for Emeka's 13th birthday and told him the watch had belonged to his own father, which was not true, I found out later, but the gesture was real. When Emeka got into Ohio State, my father rented a party room at a restaurant in Dublin and invited 40 people and gave a speech that made 3 aunties cry. And then there was me. I was, by the family's consensus, the plain child. I had none of Addis's arrangements. I had a gap between my 2 front teeth until I was 9, and then I had braces until I was 13. And during those years my father had a particular habit of looking at me during dinner, tilting his head like he was examining something puzzling, and saying variations of Maya, you are a serious-looking child. Or Maya, you should smile more, your face does better when you smile. Or, most memorably, when I was 8 years old and we had dinner with my father's business partner, a man named Gerald Fitch, and Gerald Fitch said, looking around the table, you have 3 beautiful children, Chuck. And my father nodded at Addis and said, this one, yes. And this one is the smart one, gesturing at me with a nod that contained somehow a closing of the case. Gerald Fitch laughed, a little awkwardly, and moved on. I told myself, it didn't hurt. That was my main project for most of childhood, convincing myself that something that arrived with the consistency and regularity of a meal did not, in fact, constitute nourishment or its absence. I was good at school because school was a place where I was assessed on things I could control. I could control how much I read. I could control how carefully I prepared. I could sit in a classroom at Columbus Academy on Bethel Road and be evaluated by teachers who used my name without an adjective attached to it. I was Maya Okonkwo, and I got A's in mathematics and high marks in studio art, and my 6th grade English teacher, Miss Patricia Delaney, told me once after class, pulling me aside while the other kids filed out, putting a hand briefly on my shoulder, that I had, and I remember this word exactly, remarkable spatial intelligence. I held that compliment for years like a coin. I turned it over when I needed it. I took it to bed with me. But I want to tell you about one specific childhood memory that I think forms the true beginning of this story. October 2002. I am 8 years old. The school I attend offers an annual regional math competition, and I enter it and I win. I win first place for my age group in Central Ohio. The prize is a small trophy, bronze-colored plastic, with a star on top, and a certificate that the school presents at a small ceremony on a Thursday afternoon in October, and my mother comes. My mother stands in that school gymnasium in her good coat, the green wool one she kept for occasions, and she cries a little when my name is called, and she claps harder than any other parent, and on the drive home she holds my trophy in her lap, and tells me she is so proud she doesn't have words. That night, I put the trophy on my dresser. I went to sleep happy in a way I now recognize was rare for that house. At dinner on Sunday, 4 days later, my father mentioned the competition. He mentioned it to Emeka. He said, your sister won that math thing, you know. She got a trophy. Emeka looked at me, and I looked back, and I waited. My father picked up his fork. Smart girl, he said. And then to Emeka. You need to be applying that same concentration to your football drills. And that was the entire conversation about the first competition I ever won. I told myself it was fine. I was 8. The summer I turned 14. Adaze turned 18 and went on her first international trip, a 2-week tour of London and Paris that my father paid for as a graduation present. Total cost, my mother told me years later, was $4,300. That same summer, I was accepted to a selective summer architecture program at Ohio State, one of 30 students in the state, chosen to spend 6 weeks on campus studying design, and the program had a fee of $800. I asked my father. He said he would look into it. He did not look into it. I asked again 2 weeks before the registration deadline, and he said the money wasn't available right now, and I thought about Adaze's ticket to London, and I did not say anything. My mother paid the $800 herself, from money she had saved from her nursing shifts at Ohio Health. She drove me to the Ohio State campus on a Sunday morning in June, and she hugged me at the car and said, "You build something beautiful," and she drove away, and I stood there in front of Knowlton Hall with my duffel bag, and I thought, I am going to build everything. That summer changed me. I spent 6 weeks learning how to look at space differently, how to understand a building not just as a structure, but as an argument made in 3 dimensions. I made friends. I stayed up until 2 in the morning in the studio lab drawing sections and elevations. I was, for those 6 weeks, just a person who was good at something, in a place where the thing she was good at was visible. I came home with a portfolio and 2 scaled models I'd built from basswood and museum board, and I put them on my desk, and I went to Sunday dinner and I passed the salt. I went to Carnegie Mellon for undergrad on a partial scholarship. Then I got into a master's program in architecture at the University of Pittsburgh. I was not doing any of this to prove something to my father. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this kind of story is supposed to go: the driven daughter, the cruel father, the success as revenge. It was never revenge, it was survival. I needed a self that existed outside the taxonomy of that dining room, and I was building it the only way I knew how, with my hands and my mind and the discipline I had learned in the only place that ever measured me fairly. If you've ever had to build yourself a self from scratch because the one your family gave you was broken, type "built" in the comments. I see you. I know exactly what that construction project feels like. Now let me tell you about the years when things got worse before they got better. Because they did get worse. They got considerably worse. And the agent of that worsening had a name. Bimpe Ademi Okonkwo, my father's younger sister, my Aunt Bimpe, who arrived from Lagos in 2015 and moved into the house on Sycamore Drive for what was supposed to be 3 months and became instead a 2-year occupation. Aunt Bimpe was 51 years old when she came to Columbus. She was the kind of woman who managed her own discomfort by expertly identifying and amplifying the discomforts of others. She had strong opinions about female beauty and even stronger opinions about female worth, and she had grown up in the same household as my father, which meant she had the same taxonomy installed. Within 2 weeks of arriving, she had established a routine of commenting on my appearance every time I visited the house. I was 20 at the time, home for a summer break. "Maya," she would say, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking at me with a kind of clinical interest, "you should do something about your edges. Have you tried shea butter? Adaze has beautiful edges. Or, are you exercising? Because Adaze keeps herself very lean." Or, once memorably, at a family dinner with cousins visiting, "Maya is the Okonkwo who got all the brains but none of the beauty. God balances everything." She said this with genuine cheerfulness, as if it were a compliment and a comfort combined. My father, sitting at the head of the table, did not correct her. He laughed. A short, closed-mouth laugh that functioned as agreement. I was 20 years old and I sat at that table and I felt something shift inside me. Not break, I want to be precise, not shatter, but shift, like tectonic plates, like a foundation settling. I felt something that I later understood was the end of hoping that things would change on their own. I flew back to Pittsburgh. I did not call home for 6 weeks. When my mother called me, I answered. When my father called me, which was infrequent, he was not a phone call father, I answered. And I kept those conversations short. I was professional about it, the way you are professional with someone you work with rather than love. I turned in my projects. I got my grades. I started seeing a therapist at the University Counseling Center, a woman named Dr. Sandra Nekmindirim, who was Nigerian American and understood without my having to decode the cultural framework, and who said to me in our third session, very quietly, Maya, you understand that being called ugly by your father is not a description of your face. I know that sounds obvious written down, but I had needed someone to say it to me out loud. I cried for most of that hour. Then I went back to my studio and I drew until 4 in the morning, and what I drew was the most precise, technically exact floor plan I had ever produced, and my professor gave me the highest mark in the class. I graduated from my master's program in May 2017 with a 3.94 GPA. I had already been offered a position at a firm in Chicago, Halverson and Mead Architecture, a mid-size firm on the 19th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue that did commercial and civic projects and had a reputation for taking young architects seriously. The offer was $64,000 a year with benefits and a clear track for licensure. I accepted. I found an apartment in Wicker Park. I packed my car with everything I owned: 2 architectural models, a set of Rotring pens, 3 boxes of books, a lamp my mother had given me, my first place trophy from the 2002 math competition, and I drove to Chicago. My father found out about the job at Sunday dinner the week before I left. My mother told him. He nodded and said, Chicago. Good. Then he asked Emeka how the new property in Clintonville was coming along. I told myself it didn't matter. I want to pause here because I know some of you are sitting with your own versions of this story right now. Maybe it's not a father. Maybe it's a mother, a sibling, an aunt who moved in. Maybe it's the specific and targeted way someone who should have loved you fully chose instead to love you with an asterisk, conditionally, comparatively, with reservations. If that's you, drop a flame in the comments. Just one. I'll be reading every single one. Because you need to know that what was done to you was a statement about their limitations, not your worth. That took me years to understand. I'm getting to the part where I really understood it. By 2019, I had been at Halverson and Mead for 2 years. I had been promoted once. I was the lead designer on a public library project in Evanston, a mid-sized commission, $1.8 million, that I had been given significant creative autonomy on. I had met, at a mutual friend's birthday dinner at a restaurant called Monteverde in the West Loop, a man named Daniel Osei. He was 32, a structural engineer from Accra, who had come to the US for graduate school at Northwestern and stayed. He was calm in the way that genuinely secure people are calm. Not distant, not checked out, but steady. He had a laugh that started quiet and got loud. He asked me questions, and then listened to the answers. On our third date, sitting across a table from him at a Japanese restaurant in Andersonville, I realized that I had been talking for 20 minutes about the load-bearing challenges of the Evanston Library project, and he had not once made me feel like I was taking up too much space. I thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Daniel had met my family once. Thanksgiving 2019, the first time I brought him to Columbus. My mother liked him immediately. Emeka was warm, asking him about structural engineering with genuine interest. Adie's, who had not become a senator's wife, but had married a dentist in Atlanta, and was there with her husband and their infant daughter, gave him the full assessment with her eyes and then smiled, and told me quietly in the kitchen that he was wonderful. My father was civil, polite even, by his standards. He asked Daniel about his work, about his family in Ghana, about his salary, which he asked directly, without preamble, in the way he had always done, and Daniel answered without embarrassment, naming a number that I knew impressed my father, because he nodded with his whole upper body, which was his physical vocabulary for respect. My father did not call me the ugly one in front of Daniel. He did not make any comparative observations. He was at that dinner, a version of himself that I'd only seen him be with people he wanted to impress. I watched him perform warmth at my boyfriend and I thought, I am not surprised. And I'm not angry. And that absence of anger was, I think, its own kind of grief. Daniel and I got engaged in January 2021. He proposed at home. Our home. We had moved in together in 2020 into a two-bedroom in Lincoln Park, on a Thursday night. He had made dinner himself, jollof rice from a recipe his mother had sent him, and he had put a ring in a small wooden box on the table. No restaurant, no flash mob, no performance. Just the two of us and the food and the question and my yes, which I said before he had finished asking it. The ring was simple, a round solitaire in a thin gold band, exactly what I would have chosen, because he had paid attention. I called my mother that night. She wept with happiness. I called Adediz, and she screamed into her phone. I texted Emeka, and he sent back 7 celebration emojis and called the next morning. And then I called my father. He picked up on the third ring. I told him Daniel had proposed. There was a pause, 2 seconds, maybe 3, and he said, "Good. He is a good man. He will take care of you." And then, "When is the wedding?" And I told him we hadn't figured that out yet. And he said, "Okay. Let your mother know what you need." And we said goodbye and hung up. He did not say he was happy for me. He did not ask about the ring, or how Daniel had done it, or how I felt. He said it was good that a man would take care of me, and then he asked about logistics, and then he got off the phone. I held my phone in my hand in the kitchen of our apartment on a Thursday night in January, and Daniel came up behind me and put his arms around me from behind, and I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, the lights of it laid out in the dark like an answer to a question, and I told myself, I am building this life. I am building it with my own hands. The foundation is already poured. We decided on a wedding date, September 11th, 2022. We chose the venue first, a restored industrial event space in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood called the Brick and Iron, which had been a tile factory in the 1920s and retained the vaulted ceilings and massive arched windows of its original architecture. I had walked past it during a site visit for a different project 2 years earlier and thought someday. The rental fee was $12,000 for the day, which was significant. But Daniel and I had been saving, and we had also received a surprising and generous gift from Daniel's parents in Accra. $5,000 transferred directly to our event account with a note from Daniel's mother that said, in TWI, words that translated to something like, "For the beginning of your good life together." I had that note saved in the Notes app on my phone. I still look at it. The total wedding budget was $38,000. Daniel and I were funding it ourselves, with the exception of Daniel's parents' contribution. We had decided early that we did not want to be beholden to my father's money for something this important to us, a decision that I had arrived at through a long conversation with my therapist, Dr. Nick Mandurim, who had helped me understand that accepting significant financial help from my father for the wedding would create an obligation that was not compatible with the kind of ceremony we wanted to have. My mother understood. We had a separate conversation, just the two of us, on the phone, a Sunday afternoon in March 2021, where she told me she had some money set aside. Money she had saved herself over years of nursing shifts, and she wanted to contribute $2,000 to our flowers specifically because she had seen a picture of the venue and thought the natural light deserved something extraordinary in terms of floral design. I accepted, because that felt different. My mother's money was not conditional. It never had been. My father was not uninvited to the wedding. I want to be clear about this. This is not a story where I cut off my family and built a wall. I have seen those stories and I understand them and they are valid. But my story is different. My father was invited. He would walk me down the aisle, or rather both my parents would, because I had seen my mother hold me up for 28 years and I was not going to exclude her from that walk. He would sit at the head family table, his name was on the program, his toast was expected. I had done all of this deliberately, with intention and with the understanding, which Dr. Nikim Dairam had helped me arrive at, that I was not inviting my father to my wedding for his sake. I was inviting him because I was choosing to live in the fullness of my history, not in edited versions of it. Because there were people at that wedding who deserved to see me and my father in the same room, and I was not going to deprive them of that because of his failures. But in April 2022, 5 months before the wedding, something happened that changed the specific gravity of that day. I should tell you that by this point, the ugly one comments had become less frequent. I was an adult who lived in another city. The opportunities were fewer, but they had not stopped. At Christmas 2021, my father had made a comment to Daniel's college friend who had come to Columbus with us for the holidays. A comment about how Daniel was a very handsome man, and it was funny how that worked out for his plain wife. And Daniel had looked at my father with a kind of precise, clinical stillness, and said, "Sir, I want to be clear that you are talking about the most beautiful person in any room she enters, and I'd be grateful if you kept that in mind." My father had looked surprised, then amused, then gone back to his food. Daniel had not made a scene. He had just stated a fact. I had squeezed his hand under the table so hard my knuckles hurt. But in April 2022, I got a phone call from Emeka. He was calling from Columbus, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that he called at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning, which was not his normal window. I answered and he said, "Maya, Dad has been talking to people about the wedding." I asked him to explain. He explained. My father had been telling family members and family friends, aunties, cousins, people from his church, his business partner Gerald Fitch, that he was concerned about the wedding. The specific nature of his concern, as reported back through the network of aunties and cousins, was this: that his daughter was spending too much money on a ceremony that would not reflect well on the family, because the venue was too cold and industrial, and not traditional enough, and also, and this was the part that Emeka hesitated before telling me, he had been telling people that he hoped Daniel knew what he was getting into, because Maya was not the most naturally striking of his daughters. And Daniel was a very good-looking man, and he worried that Daniel might not be, and this was apparently his phrasing, fully satisfied with what he had settled for. Fully satisfied with what he had settled for. I sat with that sentence for a long time. I held the phone in my hand in my office, on the 19th floor of the building on Michigan Avenue, and I looked at the city below and I thought, there it is. After 28 years, there it is in a sentence. Not ugly, not plain, not the smart one, just not enough. Not enough to be loved without qualification. Not enough for someone as good-looking as Daniel to have truly chosen, of his own free will and full vision. I called Daniel that evening and I told him what Emeka had told me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Does he know about your project?" I said. "What do you mean?" he said. "The Evanston Library. Does your dad know it won?" I had forgotten to mention it. 4 months earlier, in December 2021, the Evanston Public Library project had won an American Institute of Architects Chicago Chapter Design Award. One of 12 projects recognized that year out of over 200 submissions. It was not a Pritzker, it was not a career-making moment in the grand dramatic sense, but it was real. It was my name on an award, in a program, at a ceremony at the Chicago Cultural Center, where I had stood in a green dress, not unlike the blue one I'd worn to my father's birthday dinner in 2018, and accepted a certificate from a panel of architects whose work I had studied in school. My name, my building, my work. I had told my mother. I had told Daniel and his parents. I had told Adaze, who had sent me flowers. I had told Emeka, who had texted me all caps for 5 minutes. I had not told my father because, and I am only now in telling this story, finding the precise language for why, because I did not want to perform my success for him. I did not want to hand him something, and watch him weigh it and decide whether it was heavy enough to change the math. I had done that with the math trophy in 2002. I had learned my lesson, but Daniel's question made me reconsider. Not because I wanted to show my father something, but because I was beginning to understand that there was going to be a reckoning at this wedding. Not one I engineered, not one I orchestrated, but a natural one, the kind that happens when the life you've been building finally becomes visible to people who have been choosing not to see it. I made the decision, consciously, to let it happen. In June 2022, I was promoted to associate principal at Halverson and Mead. My salary went from $72,000 to $94,000. I was the youngest associate principal in the firm's 40-year history. There was a small announcement sent to the firm's clients. There was a paragraph in the Chicago Architect newsletter. There was a dinner that my colleagues threw for me at a restaurant in River North, where they made speeches, and I cried at the table and was not embarrassed about it. I did not announce this to my father either. Let me tell you about the 2 weeks before the wedding, because this is where the temperature starts to change. Emeka called me again in late August. He said he'd had a conversation with my father that he needed to share. They had been walking one of the properties together, a 6-unit building on Indianola Avenue that was due for renovation, and my father had apparently said something that gave Emeka pause. He had said, "I hope Maya's wedding is not a disappointment. I hope Daniel's family is not going to look at our daughter and feel they made a bad deal." Emeka had told him, "And I love my brother for this. I need you to understand how much I love him for this." He had said, "Dad, Maya is an award-winning architect at one of Chicago's best firms. She's 28 and she's an associate principal. She's marrying a man who adores her and who she adores. There is no bad deal here. Maya is the deal." My father had been quiet for a moment and then said, "Yes, yes, of course." But Emeka didn't think he believed it. I told Emeka, "Let it stand. I'll see you at the wedding," and I hung up the phone and I went back to the seating chart. If you've ever had to prove yourself to someone who had decided not to see you, type "seen" in the comments. I'm going to be reading every comment this week and I want to know how many of us are sitting with this particular kind of exhaustion. The week of the wedding, Daniel's family flew from Accra. His parents, Charles and Abina Osei, his older sister Efua and her husband, his 2 younger cousins. They arrived at O'Hare on a Thursday, and we took them to dinner at a West African restaurant in Hyde Park. Charles Osei was a man in his early 60s who moved through the world with the particular quality of someone who has worked hard and knows it and does not need to announce it. Abina was warm in a way that was physical. She held your arm when she talked to you. She remembered what you'd mentioned in passing weeks ago. She looked at Daniel and at me with the same expression, and I understood from that expression that she had received us as a unit. At dinner she held my hand across the table and said, "Maya, I have been waiting to celebrate you properly for a long time. This week is going to be beautiful." I thought of the note in TWI on my phone. I thought of my mother's green coat in 1997. My mother arrived from Columbus on Friday. My father drove her. They checked into the hotel, a Renaissance on Michigan Avenue that I had blocked rooms at for family, and my mother called me from the lobby before they'd even gotten to the room to tell me the hotel was beautiful and that she was already crying and the wedding hadn't even started. I laughed. I drove to the hotel and I sat with her in the lobby for an hour while my father went to the room and we talked about nothing important. The hotel restaurant, the weekend weather forecast, the flowers, which had arrived at the venue that afternoon and were extraordinary, an arrangement of white peonies and eucalyptus, and deep orange protea that filled the vaulted space of the brick and iron like something alive. My mother had chosen those flowers, essentially, had given me the budget for them, had looked at the venue photos and said, "Something warm." The florist had charged $2,200 and had earned every cent. That night, there was a rehearsal dinner. We held it at a Thai restaurant in Pilsen. Sticky Rice. A place we loved. A place Daniel had taken me on our second date when we were just finding out what we were to each other. The room was full family from both sides. Wedding party members, the 6 friends who had known us separately, and now knew us together. Speeches were made. Daniel's father gave a toast in English, and then a sentence in TWI, that he translated for us as "The tree that grows in good soil does not need to ask if its fruit is sweet." Daniel's sister Efua made a toast that made everyone laugh and then cry in the same breath. My mother stood up without a prepared speech and said simply, "I have watched my daughter build herself into someone extraordinary, and I have never been more proud," and sat back down. My father did not give a toast at the rehearsal dinner. He was present. He ate his food. He spoke to Charles Osei about property markets. Columbus versus Accra, zoning laws, the price of land, in the way that men who understand real assets speak to each other, with a kind of professional appreciation. He was not rude. He was not unkind. He was exactly what he had always been, present, but partial, there, but not fully available. Like a building that has all the right dimensions but no windows. I watched him from across the restaurant, and I thought, tomorrow is going to be a particular kind of day. September 11th, 2022. A Sunday morning in Chicago, 72 degrees at 9 a.m., the kind of early fall perfection that the city occasionally produces, as if in apology for February. I woke up at 6:15 in the hotel suite where I'd stayed with my bridesmaids, my college friend Tamara, my Pittsburgh friend and former classmate Jess, at ease, and Daniel's sister Afua, who I had asked to stand with me because she had become, in the 2 years I'd known her, someone I trusted the way you trust people who arrived in your life without agenda. I stood in the bathroom at 6:30 in the morning and looked at my face in the mirror. My face. The one that had been assessed and found wanting for 28 years. The one my father had held up as a cautionary example, a punchline, a before picture. I had a face that I had. Through years of therapy and love, and the steady work of building a life that felt like mine, arrived at something like peace with. Not pride, not yet, that was still coming, but peace. I looked in the mirror and I thought about the word beautiful, and I turned it over like my old math trophy, and for the first time I thought, yes, actually, yes. My mother came to the suite at 8 a.m. with coffee and a small box. Inside the box was a pair of earrings, gold, teardrop-shaped, traditional Igbo in their design, the kind worn at formal celebrations. She told me they had belonged to her mother, my grandmother Chidin Ma, who had died in 2006, and whose name I had never been able to say without feeling a specific shape of grief. She would have come to this wedding, my mother said. She would have sat in the front row, and she would not have stopped crying the whole time. I put the earrings in. I looked at myself in the mirror. My mother stood behind me and looked at us both. 5 seconds of silence. Beautiful, she said. At 2 p.m. I walked through the doors of the Brick and Iron on a street in Pilsen, where the afternoon light was doing something architectural to the old brick facades, turning them amber and copper, and the color of things that have withstood time. The space inside had been transformed by the peonies and the eucalyptus and the warm overhead light into something I can only describe as a room that felt like it had been designed specifically for the moment I was about to have. 112 guests, chairs in ivory linen, a string quartet playing something I had chosen, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, because it had been the piece my architecture professor at Carnegie Mellon had played in the studio on late nights when projects were due, and it had come to mean, to me, the specific feeling of being inside work that matters. I stood at the back of the room with my parents, both of them, one on each side, which we had discussed and agreed upon, and which my father had accepted without protest. My mother was on my left, my father was on my right. He was wearing a dark navy agbada that my mother had ordered from their tailor in Columbus, and it suited him, it should be said. He was a physically impressive man, tall and broad, and he wore traditional dress with the ease of someone who understood that some things were not costume. We stood there, the three of us, waiting for the signal to walk. My mother took my left hand and held it. My father stood straight, looking ahead at the 112 people in the room, and the man at the end of the aisle who was waiting for me. Daniel was standing at the altar, a simple arch of eucalyptus and white flowers that the florist had made, and he was wearing a charcoal suit and a kente stole in green and gold that his mother had chosen, and he was looking at the doorway, where I was about to appear, with an expression that I had seen on his face before, but not at this scale, not at this magnitude, not with this much room behind it. The music changed. The quartet shifted to the piece I had chosen for the processional, an arrangement of Aisha's Be My Man, that Jess had commissioned from a musician friend of hers, a string version that was warm and unhurried and exactly right. The room turned. All 112 people turned, and I walked. I want to tell you about my father's face during that walk. I was not watching him. I was watching Daniel, because Daniel was where I was going. Daniel was the destination, and I had spent enough of my life oriented toward my father's assessments to give him the direction of my gaze at my own wedding. But I heard, or rather, I felt, because in a room that still I felt, my father slow his step on my right side. I felt the change in his stride. And then I heard, very close to my ear, in a voice lower than I'd expected, something I had never heard in the same combination before, my father saying my name, and almost nothing else. He said Maya, just that, just my name. The way you say someone's name when you are arriving at them, finally, after a long trip. We reached the altar. My mother kissed my cheek and took her seat, and my father, in the tradition I had asked the officiant to incorporate, was asked by the officiant, "Who comes to offer this person in love?" And my father said, in a voice that was not quite steady, "Her family does." And he placed my hand in Daniel's, and he turned to take his seat. And then he stopped. He stood there for 3 seconds. I counted, because time moved differently in that room, and he turned back to look at me. Full look, not the assessing, tilted head look I had grown up with. A different kind of look. A look that I can only describe as the look of someone seeing something clearly for the first time that they had been refusing to see for years. He looked at me in my dress, a gown I had designed myself, in collaboration with a Chicago dressmaker named Serena Park, an architectural silhouette in ivory silk that had taken 4 months to build, and which I had paid for with my own money, $2,600, and which fit me like I had been built inside it. And he looked at the earrings, his mother-in-law's gold earrings, and he looked at my face, and he looked at Daniel's face, and something happened. 3 seconds of silence. Then he walked to his seat. The ceremony was 55 minutes. The officiant, a friend of Daniel's named Reverend Kwame Asante, spoke about love as a form of architecture. I had asked him to use that theme, not knowing how precisely right it would land in that room full of the life I had built. He spoke about the structural integrity of relationships, about foundations, about the difference between buildings designed to impress and buildings designed to last. Daniel's vows were written by hand, on a card he had folded into the inside pocket of his jacket, and he read them with a slight tremor in his voice that he did not try to hide. He said, "Maya, you have shown me that the strongest buildings are the ones that were built under the most difficult conditions. You are the most structurally sound person I have ever known. You hold everything up. It's my honor to stand next to the load-bearing wall." There was a sound in the room, not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp, somewhere between them, the sound of people recognizing a truth they hadn't known they'd been waiting for. I said my vows. I had memorized mine. I looked at Daniel the whole time. I did not look at my father. After the ceremony, after the photographs in the amber late afternoon light of the venue's courtyard, after the cocktail hour where Charles Osei found my father at the bar, and the two of them drank palm wine that Abina had brought in a glass bottle from Accra, and tucked into her checked luggage. After all of this, there was the reception. And at the reception, there were toasts. Emeka went first. He spoke about growing up with me and being proud of me in the way that brothers who have watched you be underestimated speak, with a specific heat, a controlled something, a joy that had been a long time in arriving. He mentioned the math trophy. He mentioned Carnegie Mellon. He mentioned the AIA award, which he announced to the room by name, and there was a round of applause from the Chicago contingent who knew what it meant, and a confused but enthusiastic applause from the Columbus contingent who were clapping for me on principle. Tamara went next and spoke about friendship, and made everyone cry with a story about the two of us in Pittsburgh, at 2 in the morning eating cereal on a studio floor, and her telling me I was going to change the skyline and me telling her to be quiet and draw. And then my father stood up. He was holding a glass of Hennessy, not the XO I had brought him in 2018, which he had probably consumed long ago, but a decent pour, a decent Hennessy, the same brand at least. He stood at the table and the room quieted, and I looked at him for the first time since the ceremony, and I watched his face work. He said, "I am not a man who is good with words." He paused. He looked at his glass. "I am a man who built things, properties, a company, a family." Another pause. "I have not always." He stopped. He cleared his throat. The room was entirely still. "I have not always seen my daughter clearly." His voice shifted on that sentence, broke slightly, like a surface under pressure, and caught itself. "She has built." He gestured with his free hand, the way he used to gesture at the dinner table, but this time toward me, toward Daniel, toward the room. "She has built all of this, and Daniel," he turned to Daniel, "take care of her, but understand, she will take care of herself. She always has." A pause. "I am proud. That is all I have to say. I am proud of my daughter Maya." He raised his glass. A toast. He sat down. The room drank. I looked at Daniel, who was looking at me, and he took my hand under the table and said nothing because nothing was what was needed, and he understood that. I looked across the room at my mother, who was crying but smiling, the way she had smiled in that elementary school gymnasium in October 2002, when they called my name for a trophy that no one talked about at Sunday dinner. I held my grandmother's earrings with 2 fingers, briefly, the way you hold something that belongs to the dead when you want them to know you're carrying them forward. I did not cry at my father's toast. I felt something, but it was not crying. It was closer to the feeling you get when a structure you've been monitoring for a long time finally shows the response to loading that engineering predicted it would. Confirmation. Not surprise. Confirmation. The reception went until midnight. We danced. There was a DJ who had been given a very specific set of instructions about Afrobeats, and who executed those instructions with real skill. And Daniel and I danced together, and with our parents, and with each other's parents, and with everyone in that room who had come from 2 continents to stand in a repurposed tile factory in Chicago and witness what we were making. At one point, late in the evening, I found myself standing near the bar with Charles Osei, Daniel's father, and he put a hand on my shoulder and said in his careful, particular English, "Your father spoke well tonight." He looked like a man who was arriving at something. "It took him a while," I said. "It did." He nodded. "Arrivals are arrivals," he said. "Better late than never coming at all." I thought about that for the rest of the night. The week after the wedding, Daniel and I flew to Portugal for our honeymoon, 10 days in Lisbon and the Alentejo, in a country that moved at the pace of people who understand that beauty is not an event, but a condition. We ate well, we slept. We walked through neighborhoods built from limestone and azulejo tile, and I looked at old buildings the way I always do, as arguments made in 3 dimensions, as evidence of what people believed was worth making permanent, and I felt, in that specific way that comes rarely, and is worth protecting when it arrives, that I was inside my own life, not beside it, not performing it, not trying to prove it to anyone, inside it, present in it, at home in it. When we came back to Chicago, I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, which was different from his usual third. I said, "Dad, I wanted to call and tell you that your toast at the wedding, it meant something to me." There was a pause. He said, "I meant it." I said, "I know." Another pause. I said, "I need you to know something. I am going to need things to be different going forward." The comments about my appearance, from you at family dinners or anywhere, those have to stop. Not because I'm asking a favor, because it's a condition. I can't come to Sunday dinner if that's still happening. I can't bring my husband to that house if he's going to watch his wife be spoken about that way. I'm not asking you to become someone else. I'm asking you to be careful with me. That's all. Silence. Long silence. I counted. 5 seconds. 6. Maya. His voice. "Yes. Just that. Yes. Okay. Yes." I said. "Good." He said. "Good." We talked for another 11 minutes about the honeymoon and the weather in Columbus, and a property he was renovating on Fifth Avenue, and whether I was eating enough in Portugal or just walking around looking at old buildings, which made me laugh, because he was not wrong. When we hung up, I sat for a moment with the phone on my knee, and I felt the particular quality of relief that comes not from a problem being solved, but from a problem being named out loud in the presence of the person who made it. It was not forgiveness. I want to be honest about that. Forgiveness, the real kind, is a long project, and I am partway through it. What it was, that phone call, was a door being set in a wall, not fully open, not locked, a door that we could both use carefully on agreed terms. Over the months that followed, things changed in the small ways that real change happens, not dramatically, not all at once, but in accumulated moments. My father called me, in January 2023, to tell me he had seen an article in a Columbus architecture publication about the Evanston Library. It had been included in a roundup of recent Midwestern civic projects, and he had shown it to Gerald Fitch. He didn't make a speech about it, he just said, "I saw your building in a magazine. Fitch said it's very good." I said, "Thank you, Dad," and we talked about something else. At Easter dinner 2023, the first Sunday dinner in Columbus I attended after the wedding, my father introduced me to his pastor's wife, who was visiting for the holiday, and he said, "This is my daughter, Maya. She's an architect in Chicago, award-winning." He said it matter-of-factly, the way you say something that is simply true, without performance or qualification. No asterisk, no adjective that classified me relative to my sister. Just Maya. Award-winning. His daughter. I passed the salt. I want to tell you where I am now. I am 31 years old. I live in Lincoln Park with my husband Daniel, who is still calm and still has that laugh that starts quiet and gets loud, and who still asks me questions and then listens to the answers. We have a dog named Nkosi. Daniel chose the name. It means king in Zulu. The dog weighs 9 pounds and fully believes it. And a second bedroom that we are in the early stages of imagining differently. The firm promoted me again in October 2023. I am now a principal at Halverson and Mead. I have my own projects. I have junior architects who come to me with questions, and I try very hard to look at their work the way Miss Delaney looked at mine. Like it is real, like it matters, like the person making it is worth taking seriously. My mother and I talk every Sunday. We have done this since I left for Carnegie Mellon, and we have not stopped. She is 61 and still working 2 nursing shifts a week, because she says the work keeps her connected to what is real. She visited us in Chicago in the spring, and I took her to the Evanston Library, her first time seeing it in person. We stood in the main reading room, where the light comes in through the high windows I designed specifically to catch the afternoon sun, and distribute it evenly across the reading tables, and my mother walked slowly through the space with her head tipped back, looking up, and then she turned to me and said, "You made this?" I said yes. She said nothing else. She didn't need to. My father and I are, as I said, in the middle of a long project. We have Sunday dinners when I'm in Columbus, which is 3 or 4 times a year. He does not make comments about my appearance. He asks about my projects with what I now believe is genuine interest. He is a man who built things, it turns out, and he can respect a person who builds things, and he is learning slowly that those two things, me and the kind of person he respects, are not separate. It is not the relationship I wished I had grown up with. It is not the warmth that Daniel's parents offer, which still, honestly, catches me off guard sometimes. Abina calling me on my birthday and talking for 40 minutes, Charles sending me an article about Ghanaian architects he thinks I should know about. It is not that, but it is something. It is a door in a wall that we use carefully, and occasionally the light through it is enough. Here is what I want to say to you directly, because you've been watching and listening and sitting with this story, and you deserve something true to take with you. Being told you are less than, by the people who were supposed to see you first and most clearly, is not a description of your reality. It is a description of their limitations. The limitations of their capacity to see past their own inherited hierarchies, their own fears, their own unexamined assumptions about worth. My father called me ugly for 28 years, and not one of those words changed the architecture of my face. What those words tried to do, and what I spent years in therapy and work and love carefully dismantling, was change the architecture of how I saw myself. And that project, the dismantling one, is the most important structure I have ever worked on. More important than the Evanston Library. More important than any award. Because a person who knows her own worth is a load-bearing wall. She holds things up. She doesn't ask permission to take up space. This is not a revenge story. I need to say that clearly. My father giving a proud toast at my wedding was not a trophy I won. My success at Haverson and Mead was not a message I sent. The life I built with Daniel in a Chicago apartment with a 9-pound dog named Kosi is not evidence I gathered for a case I was making. It is just my life. I built it because I needed somewhere to live that was truly mine, and I built it carefully, and I built it well, and it turns out that a life built carefully and well has a way of becoming undeniable on its own terms. Not to prove something, but because that is simply what well-built things do. Your turn. I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me who in your life was supposed to see you clearly and chose not to. Tell me what you built in spite of them. Tell me where you are now in that long project, the dismantling one. And if you're still in the early stages, if you're still in the part of the story where the dinners are still happening, and the comments are still landing, and you're still passing the salt, and telling yourself it doesn't hurt, I want you to know that that part is not the whole story. You are not at the end, you are in the middle, and the middle is where all the building happens. Type architect in the comments if this story found you where you needed to be found. If you're new here, please subscribe. Every subscriber means another person finds these stories, and some of them need to find them very badly. There's a link in the description to another story from this channel that I think you'll want to watch next. It goes somewhere unexpected. I'll see you there. My name is Maya Okonkwo. I am 31 years old, and I am the one who built this.